Okay, we are live with another Get in the Room interview, and I'm so excited because we have Chelsea Grayson here. And little backstory, because I like to set y'all up. So Chelsea's man is my trainer. And if you're in Style Confidence Collective, we went live with Frank last week, and Frank's awesome. And Frank, once we started working out together, he was like, oh my, Chelsea, she's so great. Chelsea this, Chelsea that. And I swore, maybe this is true, I don't know. I swore Chelsea could not stand my ass. So I was I was always like, oh my, is she gonna fight me? I was scared. And then as we got to know each other, better, I was like, holy crap, this woman is such a badass, and she's so sweet, and she's so smart. And now I consider you a friend, and I'm no longer fearing for my safety.
I really want to dig into that because I get that a lot, and I hate the term resting bitch face. I just feel like it's so sexist, but I guess I have that. I don't know, but I have this big toothy grin. I don't get it. I feel like I'm always smiling, but apparently not.
I don't know. I guess I just felt like your strong presence or something. And I'm like,
goodness.
Well, I like to be very respectful and just careful is the wrong word, but I don't like to be disrespectful when I'm friends with a guy. And Frank's my trainer, but we're also homies. So yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, is that homie energy coming off that she's I need to cut a bitch?
No.
But then I realized that was ridiculous once I got to know you better. But yeah. In the beginning,
that wasn't it at all. But I do get that all the time. Oh, you're intimidating. You've got such a strong presence. I'm like, damn, I just I'm such an introverted homebody. I don't know where all of that comes out, but I don't know. Maybe that's one of my things.
Well, also because you're powerful. And I think there's probably some stereotypical things that people make unconscious associations with. So you were a lawyer, correct?
Yes. So I'm a recovering lawyer now, but for the first, call it 20 years of my career, I was a deal junkie. So I did deal. I was an M&A lawyer. I was a partner at really what's now the biggest or the second biggest law firm in the world called Jones Day. And so I ran the California M&A practice, and I co-chaired the firm's global cross-border M&A practice, which is what kicked off all of this amazing business travel I did at the first 20 years of my career. I've been everywhere. But I was never in the courtroom, so I'm not that. I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Okay, so you were that, and then you became Miss CEO of some very powerful and recognizable brands and companies. How did that transition happen?
So I thought I was going to retire with the gold watch from Jones Day, but I made sort of a career hiccup. I can go into detail there a little bit if you want.
Please.
Yeah, it was the best career mistake I ever made. But until then, I hadn't made any career mistakes, so it was super off-putting to have made one. I transitioned over to another firm for a couple of different reasons. I felt like I wanted to have more control over my billable rate because I was being billed out at $1,000 an hour in Los Angeles. It's impossible to develop new business when you're that expensive. And I felt like I wanted to dabble a little bit in M&A and the music and entertainment industry, and Jones Day didn't do that. So I went over to the premier music and entertainment firm at the time. And it suited me from a business perspective. And I did all of that diligence and figured out that I was going to be able to really develop my book in a really healthy way. But the one thing I failed to diligence was the culture. And it was absolutely the wrong fit for me. I realized it from day one, the minute I stepped in the place. And I tried to do things to sort of ameliorate that and fix that along the way. And I managed to do it for a couple of years and really hang in there because I'm not a quitter and I wanted to give it a chance. But I ultimately realized I was going to have to lateral back to my old firm. And thankfully, they were happy to take me back. I was even going to go back and get my exact same corner office on the 50th floor. Nothing changed, get my old position back and everything. But it was in that little interim period, that period of vulnerability where, I had accepted the offer, but I was waiting to make my transition back to the firm when I got a call from the chairman of the board of American Apparel. And she said that she had been on a general counsel search and hadn't been able to find the right person, had been really nonplussed by the candidates, had heard about me from the general counsel of CBS Corp, who I'd represented for years and years and years, and wanted to talk to me about the position. And at the time, American Apparel had lost over $300 million in the previous 5 years. I mean, to say liquidity crisis is like the understatement of the century. Corporate culture crisis, also understatement. For any of you people out there who remember this from 2014, the founder and CEO of American Apparel was the open and notorious Dov Charney, who's also recently been in the headlines just now. His new factory's just been shut down because 4 people died of COVID, unfortunately, and like 300 more have tested positive because they weren't apparently following any of the rules and regulations in terms of, safety in the workplace. But at the time, he was the target of a significant number of allegations of sexual assault and battery and sexual harassment and embezzlement by the SEC. And, the list goes on. And American Apparel was in crisis, to say the least, and had been wiped clean of its entire C-suite. There had been a whole new board put in place. So it was in crisis and transition and restructuring, the works. And I said to her, why would I come to this? And you're giving me a 50% pay cut and you're offering me equity, which I know is going to turn to ashes and dust. Why would I do that? And she said to me, well, you're a native Angelino, and this is a company that employs 10,000 people globally. And the vast majority of those are textile manufacturer workers that are in 6 factories that we own in Los Angeles. And they're all immigrant workers. And if this company fails, the barriers to entry for another company like this are so high, no one else is going to fill this void, and they will have no jobs. They are not trained to do anything else. And they came here on the vision of the founder of this company to do exactly what they're doing now. So if you care about keeping their jobs, which I, of course, did care very much about, and she said, and if you care about the philosophical tenets that this company has always stood for, whether or not we had a good or a bad founder, it was philanthropically involved in LGBTQIA issues historically. It was about female empowerment, ironically. But, the company, as you know, Lauren, because you're in fashion, had never hired traditional models. We had just plucked people off the streets, no airbrushing, no photoshopping. If you have grays, wrinkles, cellulite, whatever, we celebrated that in our marketing assets. The company, of course, stood for the very liberal side of immigration reform because so many of our employees were, immigrant textile manufacturing workers. And she said, if you care about all of that, then you'll come and try to help us save this company. And it still sounded crazy, but because I was in that vulnerable place of having made a mistake and going back, retreading old ground, which was going to be safe and secure, but still I felt like I was going backwards, that sort of gave me the impetus to make a leap of faith, so I took the general counsel job. And that's how I first transitioned over to American Apparel, though still in a legal capacity.
Wow. That is so cool.
Yeah.
That is so cool, because I feel like a lot of people would be like, that sounds nice, but money,
Yeah, I think sometimes you get to a place also. I mean, remember, I was 20 years into my career. So I had been a big equity partner at the biggest law firm in the world. I mean, so I had stacked up my cash, and I've been responsible with it. So, I mean, I had a pile, so I had a little bit of flexibility, and I had created that flexibility for myself, frankly, where I could make a choice at that point. So yes, money. Yes, I wanted to continue to build up that nest. But I had a little bit of wiggle room, which was really nice, so I could afford to do something that in the short term probably wasn't going to garner me much, every couple of weeks on a paycheck. But I felt like in the long term, if we turn the company around, my equity is going to shoot up, Ultimately, what we did was, we turned it around and sold it. You're still going to get a huge big from that sale. I felt like no matter what, I was going to make more money in the end, and it was going to contribute to my resume in such a way that it was going to dividend out for me for a long time. So I just took the short-term hit.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I love, I'm starting this challenge, starts next week. Hopefully everybody's joined, laurenmessiah.com/room, get in the room challenge. But I talked to women about getting into a position of power, getting into the room and actually using it for something good.
Yeah.
And I feel like you've been such a great example of that. Like, I didn't even know this story, and I think that's incredible, but I've seen what you've done with other companies, how you've came in and completely changed the vision and the positioning and who's represented. Is that something that is just in you? Is that something that you've had to fight for? Like, have you struggled with that at all along the journey?
In terms of implementing my vision?
Yeah, like
I
really standing for what you believe in over bullshit that could come in business.
Yeah. And there's always something, right? I mean, I guess what I've always had what I think you have, which is I've always, even if I wasn't in a position of leadership, I always looked at the leaders and thought, gosh, I would do that differently. Or, yeah, I would be wielding that power for a different reason. You know, they're so powerful. Why aren't they using it to fix this? Or why aren't they using it in this direction? But what I saw a lot of people who felt the same way that I did coming up, who failed at getting into leadership positions and ultimately therefore failed at implementing their own initiatives because they came at it so aggressively and from such an angry place, from such a place of challenging power. You know, you don't speak power to power in that way. You have to come up and ameliorate things a little bit, you know. You have to come up and play within certain structures and certain parameters in order to get there and then implement your vision. But yeah, I've always had very core tenets that I've always wanted to implement moving forward.
Yeah. And I like what you're bringing up about really deciding like which levers of power you're going to pull, like how strongly, when to hold back, when not to hold back, you know. So for me, like, I'm now president of Entrepreneurs Organization, LA chapter.
Yeah.
And I want to bring like more diversity. You know, I look around and I'm like, there's not enough Black people here. There's not enough women here. And I have this vision. And like you said, these like core, you know, tenets in me that are like, I want to get this done. And I have ideas and I'm like, okay, Messiah, like maybe that's a little too strong. Like maybe people aren't going to respond to that. And it could hinder the greater vision. I feel a lot of people want to rebel when there's strategy that's really important.
The key is, listen, everybody thinks in terms of dollar signs. So the way not to threaten the power structure, the way to convince them to go your way is to speak to them in CFO terms, speak to them in P&L lingo, you know, profit and loss lingo, right? Speak to them the way that you would to a CFO. Come to them armed with data. So listen, this is how, like, for example, I came to True Religion, for example, because I think that's the company you're referring to where I sort of changed, you know, a lot of what was happening in terms of content and marketing. You know, I came to them and I said, look, your marketing has a certain image and look always, which isn't the same as who your customer is. So you want to understand why your sales have flattened. You want to understand why revenue doesn't have that gorgeous hockey stick that everyone in corporate America wants. It's because you've had this beautiful, loyal customer as a heritage brand, and luckily you still have a halo around your brand, but they're just hanging on for dear life. There's nothing here that attracts them anymore. They're just here because heritage, because it was always True Religion, because that's what they wore to the club or whatever, you know. But it's not like they're seeing anything in the ads that draws them there emotionally. It's not like they're seeing anything in the product that's continuing to draw them. They're just there because of core loyalty. And so you're going to not only continue to see the flat, you're going to start to see a decrease as time moves on and loyalty kind of diminishes. So speaking to them in that way and pointing to the pocketbook and pointing to the dollars of the company and suggesting that, why don't we change who appears in the marketing campaigns? Not only from an ethnically diverse perspective, but also from body type, right? Why don't we include people up and down the scale, all shapes, all sizes, all weights, right? Why don't we include different sorts of apparel that might be more suited to the folks that are naturally gravitating towards the brand? And you're going to see that gorgeous hockey stick. Now, of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, because I always want to diversify because corporate America is just so incredibly lily white and so skinny, you know? I always want to bring that. That's my own personal initiative always. But for them, it was more just about common sense. You know, here are the numbers. Here's where you want the numbers to be. And here's the path forward to how you get there. You just give them an operating plan.
Ooh, so good. Chelsea is teaching us things. And you have a YouTube channel, right? You've got like your CEO school. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, if you go to my Instagram, you'll see a link in the bio to it. So I do two shows. I do From the Office of the CEO, which is little 10, 15-minute tidbits of just the kind of stuff I just talked about. And then I have the interview show, which is now actually produced by Dame Dash, who was the co-founder of Rockefeller with Jay-Z. That moved over onto his platform for the most part. But I've been on hiatus because COVID and I'm old, so I'm not leaving the house.
That is so good. So what you're bringing up to me is like, not only do you have to get in the room, but you have to stay in the room. Mm-hmm. But what ways have you used besides your resume to like really get into these hard to access places that have been taken? Like, I think there's a misconception behind fashion that like, oh, it's like just all these fabulous girls like working like at the top. It's very white male.
Yeah, everything is either it's publicly traded or it's held by private equity and venture capital, sometimes some hedge funds, you know, and that's all for the most part white guys, you know. I mean, look, I started out my career, like I say, as a lawyer, but going into, you know, boardrooms and negotiating deals where I was frequently the only woman in the room. And I had to learn a lesson early on to do my initial negotiating rounds, the first couple of negotiating rounds on the phone rather than in person, which is actually against common wisdom, by the way. Right? Face-to-face is always the best way, absent a pandemic. By the way, I could talk about handshakes also, but it now seems totally irrelevant.
I'm still curious, but go on.
But you know, so it used to be common wisdom. You get in the room, you face people eye to eye, and that's how you establish a rapport, and that's really the way to get a deal done. For me, as one of the only women in M&A when I first started out, because there were like all of two of us, I had to be on the phone for the first couple of rounds because then and only then were they hit with what I was saying and they could actually focus on my thoughts and what I was articulating. Mm. And then I got into the room and they didn't need to get past what I look like in order to hear what I was saying. And that's a trick that I've passed down to a lot of women because that really does you can walk into a room and you think you're dressed in a very conservative way that's not sexual or sexualized at all. You got some nice heels on, whatever, but all men are typically looking at, they're just sizing you up. Is she a 1? Is she a 10? What's her body? That's, and meanwhile, you're making all these amazing points and they're not hearing it. So that's one way to, you know, once you get in the room to immediately be a very powerful force, you know, because they already know they need to listen to you. They already know that you've bested them in a couple of negotiating rounds and they don't have time to pay attention to what you look like or what your ass looks like when you're going over there to grab yourself a cup of coffee. Sorry to use the word ass on your Facebook, but
come on now. we use it all. Man, yeah. I have not heard that tip and that's incredibly useful and powerful. A lot of women that I come across, because I work in, you know, the styling space, there's so much focus on, it shouldn't matter what I look like. I'll wear whatever I want. They should like me for me. And I'm like, girl, no. Like there are so many decisions that have to go into appearance when you're seeing someone. I love that bypass of not letting them see you at first. But once they are seeing you, how have you used style to, you know, really solidify your presence and power?
Yeah. Don't let them get distracted by anything. You know, listen, when you're at work, when you're in a professional setting, that is not the time where you're trying to hook your man or your woman or whatever it is that you are. That is not the time. You don't need to be sexy. You don't need to show off how many pairs of Louboutins you've got. Those are never going to be considered to be career shoes. Those are sexy shoes. Men don't look at those as if, ooh, it's red, it's powerful. No, it's red, it's sexy. Just put the grind that heel into my chest now or whatever it is, right? That's how they look at Louboutins, just FYI, right? I mean, So if you just get yourself a nice, my uniform happens to be, I wear a lot of Chanel and St. John vintage blazers, and over a pencil skirt, generally speaking, although right now I'm wearing Nike booty shorts, slides, which has been so liberating not to wear 4.5-inch heels every day. But, you give yourself a uniform. You don't stand out from the herd. You don't need to be sexy. You do need to look good. You do need to put makeup. You do need to do hair. You do, because otherwise you're going to look completely slouchy and totally, completely lazy. And they're going to attribute laziness to you if you haven't put yourself together in a polished way. But yet you can be fashionable, but this is not the catwalk. This is not the time to be sexy and show a bunch of cleavage and wear something super tight. You can do that on your off time. You can do that on your date after the office, but don't do that at the office. Don't do it at corporate events. The other thing I used to hate, back in the old days when we would actually all show up physically to an office somewhere, where was this proliferation of casual Fridays, and which ultimately bled into like casual week somehow. And for men, maybe that does work a little bit. And this is, again, where the sort of unfairness and the imbalance between the two genders happens, because men, they can put on a pair of slacks and a button-down shirt and be fine. And they feel casual and they're comfortable and it is what it is. That doesn't translate well over to our side of things. It never does. There's no effective way to be casual in a corporate setting, in a business setting. You either, again, you look sexy, you look provocative, you look slouchy, whatever it is. The other thing is, though, generally in terms of being casual, I feel like if you dress casually, you're going to work casually, and that's never going to be a good thing.
Totally. I mean, look at you. You're at home in Chanel.
Always, because it's like, for me, it's a mindset too. I get up, I've got a particular routine I go through, and this is my uniform. I put it on. This is no different from any other workday for me. In fact, it's even more important because, again, we're all sitting in these totally informal situations in our home offices. You still want people, when you get on, you want them to snap to, we're in a work setting right now. Let's put our work brains on and let's really engage. And that's the uniform is part of it. It's suiting up to go to war, right? But I don't know. I want to go back to your question of sort of how do you get in that room, because it is a very methodical process. I mean, it's like, following on to what I started to say about, my journey to get to American Apparel. Once I got there, I still had to take a journey from the general counsel's office to the business side of things, which is how I got promoted to the CEO spot. And that was incredibly methodical. I mean, that was me, messaging to everybody early, often, and regularly that I could in positions of power there. And that would be my CEO and my board, what I ultimately wanted in my career. Now that I had switched over to be in company, now I felt like I ultimately wanted to switch over to the business side and run something one day. And I made sure that everybody heard that goal, not to come off ambitious, but just so that they would become part of my journey and feel responsible for helping me along the way in my journey, that they would feel engaged in my process. So I made sure they all understood that they were part of my team in getting there. So that was one thing. And then another thing, I never sort of siloed myself. As busy as I ever got, I never siloed myself just to putting my head down and getting my own work done. I made sure to run out and join other meetings just to be a fly on the wall. I would join meetings that had nothing to do with being a general counsel at all, but just business division meetings. So I could understand holistically how the company was run. And if you pull a lever over here on the legal side, if you don't approve a contract or if you require something to go into an agreement, how does that affect that business relationship that people are trying to transact? So what levers are you pulling that are impacting other business and operations around the company? I felt like that was really important for me to understand to get my job done, comprehensively. And so once I started to understand, how all the different pieces work together in the company, the board actually sort of saw that and said, actually, we should give her a couple of divisions to run, business divisions to run, so she can officially be involved in those and really have a hand in shaping those divisions. So they put 3 business divisions under me and added a title of Chief Administrative Officer. And then when they sent me out as the general counsel in natural order of things to negotiate with Goldman Sachs to do the debt for equity swap that sort of saved us from that liquidity crisis that I talked about earlier. they took us private. So now we're privately held by Goldman Sachs. Now Goldman Sachs has been watching me the whole year kind of evolve from general counsel to really understanding business and operations. They've now seen me in action in terms of negotiating with them on going private. It was the natural step for them to then say, we want you to run this thing. We trust you. That was a year-long interview. And that's the other thing. You should always assume you're on a job interview. No matter what you're doing. Assume that you are being interviewed for your next gig. And it might be a gig you didn't even know you wanted, but somebody wants for you. But assume it.
Ooh.
They're interviewing you.
That's so good. So a couple things stood out to me. One, mindset. Like how not... I feel like a lot of people think the path is just so linear. Like, you know, like here's the American, whatever their version of the American dream is. And they think that it should be like, find the job opening, apply, get the job, don't get the job, move on, don't move on. I'm reading this book called Mindset. It's really good. And it talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. And the fixed mindset is they think it's a path that goes like this. If someone doesn't let them in on the first try, it's over. You clearly have a growth mindset. How do you cultivate that? Like, is that something that you woke up and you're like, this is how I am? Do you read books? Do you meditate? Like, what do you do?
I didn't realize I had that until I kind of like at some point stood and looked back at everything. I thought I was very linear, actually. I had a really corporate America path that looks traditional, right? So I was a lawyer, I was an associate, then I got promoted to partner, then I was there for 20 years. I mean, you know, it looks super, super traditional. I didn't realize that the whole time I had been zigging and zagging. I think if you think about it in the moment, it's overwhelming and super terrifying. You know, because human beings at base, we don't like change. You have to force yourself to embrace change. You have to force yourself to be uncomfortable all the time, because only when you're uncomfortable all the time are you ever going to truly make any progress, you know? But looking at that in any given moment is very intimidating and overwhelming. I think that for me anyways, and this is, again, just my path. It doesn't have to be anybody else's path. I did have to establish that base of getting that first massive success under my belt. So I could say, I'm an equity partner at Jones Day. And then getting the next big traditional title under my belt of, I am the general counsel of a huge public company that everybody knows called American Apparel. And it was only then that I felt comfortable to start riffing a little bit, because I knew how to swim and there's no amount of deep water or big wave that I'm not going to be able to get out of. So I think, you know, and I don't know if that's the right guidance for millennials today. I'm not sure, because everybody is such a lily patter these days, and they seem to be very comfortable with that, switching every couple of years to get the raise or the promotion. But in some way, shape, or form, you do want to get that foundation, because it doesn't matter what sort of growth mindset you have if you don't have the foundation of the right training, the right education, the right seasoning. You've been in the right experiences, so you know you've seen one of everything, and you can react in an intelligent and proactive way. And almost as important as everything I just said, you've had the right mentors.
Ooh,
way.
yeah.
And you never stop gaining mentors. Those are the people that help you zig and zag in a really intelligent way. The right mentor at the right time can show you a door to a room that you never even knew existed. You didn't even know you should be in.
That is so, so true. And as you were talking about, like, actually saying what your dreams are and bringing people on that journey, that's so key. I remember when I was just like a little idiot, you know, I started in corporate, not in a baller position like you. I was an executive assistant at AOL. And then I moved to a startup here in California. And I just had this arrogance and sense of entitlement of like, I've been here XYZ amount of times. Like, I want a raise. Like, you don't understand. I'm supposed to be great. Like, I'm supposed to do this. And thankfully, I had a couple of people who identified that growth mindset in me. Like, I remember I used to work for a company called This Next. And I don't know, do you know Gordon Gould? He does the Smarty Pants vitamins. He was the founder and CEO of the company. And I interviewed, and I had no experience. but I talked about how I make vision boards. And he's like, okay, I see something in you. There's something that we can work with here.
Wow.
You're hired, which was so shocking. And when I worked at AOL and switched over to this startup, it was called Lat34, is an action sports website. Jeff Rowe, who founded that company, he was a big executive at NBC and at AOL. He was like, I see something in you. So just like being in that presence,
100%.
you're able to have someone to be like, all right, little girl, like, shut the fuck up. You don't deserve a raise. Like, this isn't how the world works. And from there, yes, like finding mentors, joining masterminds. You can't do this shit by yourself. Like, you just can't.
And and I mean, and to your point though, but just having those conversations and it getting you to the next rung of the ladder. I mean, even after I sold American Apparel, I'll admit, like I sort of announced to some people, I'm kind of like semi-retired, you know, I was just so exhausted from the whole journey. But I had a very specific conversation with Goldman Sachs, you know, and I said, look, really, after telling everybody I'm sort of semi-retired, what my real dream is to sit on public company boards professionally for the rest of what I've got going here. And it was just that conversation where they started mining, you know, that was sort of the start of their initiatives in terms of further diversifying boards and putting more women and diversity onto their boards and all that. And that's how the True Religion board popped up, because they also own True Religion. So they initially just put me on that board based on their, you know, positive experience with me at American Apparel. And it was a year later when they said, let's do deja vu all over again. And we'd actually like to take you from the board and plop you in as the CEO. Wow. And that all just sparked from just a little private conversation I had with them where I just sort of messaged what I really wanted to do. And they made themselves a part of my journey.
Yeah, I think that's so important to not only bring people in on your journey, but to have a greater awareness of what's possible. Yeah. And I feel like so many women are shortchanging themselves because they think that it's impossible to penetrate these spaces. You know, it's too hard. I don't have the degree yet. I don't have this yet. And they make their dreams super duper small when really anything's possible. Like if you told someone your story, they wouldn't believe it. Like, oh yeah, I was like a lawyer and then I was like the CEO, like 2 companies. Like people would be like, what? But to even expand your mind to think about those things and, like you said, open your mouth. Like I've wanted to have a published book forever. And anyone who will listen, I talk about it until the right person was like, oh, I should introduce you to my agent. And I had one call with the agent. She's like, oh my gosh, I have meetings with all of these publishing houses. Can you overnight me your book? I was prepared. I sent it. I have a book deal. It's coming out next year. But
congratulations.
Thank you. Unless you have the dream and can rally people behind you and have that mindset to always be learning and not entitled, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and even just the weirdest of positions that you've never even imagined, right? I mean, you had a very specific goal of book. I mean, my goal, honestly, in wanting to sit on boards for a living, that has definitely come true. I do sit on 3 boards, you know, that is how I pay my mortgage and all of that, you know. But I was having a conversation with somebody about what it is I really like about sitting on boards. And it's this idea of all of these things I've been through, and I've seen at least one of everything, if not 20 of everything. And I can keep my powder dry because I know generally how things are going to sort themselves out. And I know how to get through sticky situations. And, you know, all of that seasoning, I wanted to lend it from a 30,000 foot altitude perspective to management at other companies without having to actually get in and do the work, right? That's the beauty of sitting on a board. You get paid less than what management gets paid, but if you got a bunch of them, you can string them together. But it's this cool way of being able to lend all of that experience to people who really need it, who are still in the trenches. And so at core, that's what I liked about it. And I didn't realize that there were other positions where you can do that. And there actually is this other position where you can do that. And it's called an executive in residence position. And I took one about 6 months ago, and I've had it ever since with a big marketing technology company called BounceX. I didn't even know that was a position that existed. It's apparently a concept that came from Silicon Valley. And it's where it's sort of a hybrid between management and board. So you're a little bit more involved in the board, but you're still not actually employed by the company. And you're like Wendy Rhodes on Billions, right? You have office hours every week. Anybody from the CEO on down to the last person hired in the company can come and talk to you, pick your brain about initiatives, politics, bureaucracy, their own private career development thoughts, whatever it is. And you can lend all of your seasoning to help each of these people along their journey and to ultimately help the company move forward, because when the water rises, all boats float, so you're helping all these individuals to help the company move forward. I didn't even know 6 months ago that sort of a thing was available to me, let alone that I would be hired to do that for a company.
Wow.
Executive in residence. It's so mind-blowing. So yeah, I mean, it's just, you're right. Anything is possible. You can make money in so many different ways if you just know what it is you're good at and what it is you really enjoy doing, those things together.
Something else that I found incredibly impressive about you, like now that I learn all of this, I'm like, oh my God, this woman is literally like an Avenger or something. You're like a superhero. Because I watched, through working out with Frank, he was like, oh, Chelsea's got some extra time. And I'm like, okay, first of all, how is that possible? Because I've just learned. And then you started a podcast and you're like, you didn't know anything about starting a podcast.
Nope.
Like, you didn't know anything. And you're like, no, I'll do it. And now your podcast is Damon Dash bot. I mean, tell us about that and just having that limitless mentality, because more of us need that. I think so many people sit on ideas and they're like, oh, I can't do it. I don't have money. I don't have time. I don't know how. You figure shit out.
Yeah. I mean, okay, look, the key is also once you get into, your late 40s, early 50s, well, actually, I should correct that. I should say kind of from middle 40s on, you should be at a place where, you got your fingers in a lot of different pies. That's for sure. You got a lot of income streams. You got a lot of stuff going on. You got ideas percolating, but you're not busy 24/7. You know what I'm saying? You got to learn to leverage your brand to be deployed by lots of different people on your team, or you got to learn to manage your brand so that it's not taking up all of your time to deploy that brand one way or the other. I hate that word personal brand, but anyways, it seemed to work perfectly in that sentence. But you just got to treat yourself basically as a public company, your whole career. You're a public company and you're the CEO and board. And you'd never want the CEO to have 16 different reports. You want her to have 3 to 5 reports maximum, because you don't want the CEO to be busy all the time. You need her to sit in her office every once in a while and have visions and dreams and do strategic planning, right? That's where you need to be by the time you kind of hit your middle 40s to lower 50s. And so I'm 48. So I'm sort of in that sweet spot of I've set a bunch of these things up and I can swoop in, I can paratrooper in and pay attention to those things, but I've still managed to block out chunks of each of my days where I have some free time that I never had before when I was coming up, because I was so aggressive with my calendar and I felt like I needed to be in a flurry of work all of the time. And that you just can't do that the older you get. You don't have it like that anymore. It's exhausting. And also I needed to actually see my kids before they got up and moved out of the house. And they're 16 and 18 and that's going to happen any second. So I don't know, the podcast thing, it was, I'll be honest, that came from, one of the initiatives I'd started to push at True Religion was we needed more video content. As anybody knows, video content is the thing, is the marketing asset you need to create the most of and deploy from a performance marketing perspective. It's the thing that gets the most engagement. And we had started to do this interview series. And then when I resigned, they said to me, look, I mean, this was you. It had you all over it. You were the person that was interviewing all of these people for this content. If you want to take it, it's yours. We can't possibly continue it. People will revolt, And so I took it. I changed the name and I sort of kept the format of interviewing people from the perspective of, look, you found a niche. You found a niche that you filled in a really unique way. You spotted a need, and whether it was a need that looked like it was seemingly oversaturated by people that were serving it, but it wasn't really, or whether it was a need that people didn't even realize they had, you filled it, you became very successful. How did you do that? But more importantly, what's the next niche you're seeing? What's the next thing that you're focusing on that you're going to monetize? And, sometimes people tell you and sometimes they don't. But, and because I just wanted to know, I was just curious, and I did have some time and I needed to take a breather after leaving that post. And it was cathartic for me to have these conversations with people. And it so happened that Dame, I was at his studio. I had been invited to his studio to watch them film one of his shows for his network. The guy that was on this show had previously been on my show, and we had a really good interaction. And he said, hey, I'm going to go over to Dame's studio next week and sit on one of his shows. And why don't you come along? They always have a live audience. So I was really just there as a part of the live audience. But I got there early, like I do everywhere, because I'm a Jew and we get every place early, And I got there early and I was the only person in the studio. And Dame walked in, I was like, is that Dame Dash? Oh my gosh, look the other way, because I was like, I don't know, like, what are we going to say to each other? He made a beeline over to me. He knew exactly who I was. We had a whole conversation. He wanted to know all about American Apparel and Dove, and he wanted to know all about True Religion. He's got his own apparel line. So we had a whole business conversation. And he asked me what sorts of things I was involved in. And I told him about the show. And he took a look at a couple of the episodes and just said, no, you should put this on my network. I want to co-produce this. And boom, I'm filming it at his studio. So crazy. It's so crazy how it happened. And it got so much more, obviously the audience is huge. It's totally the right audience for the show. It's like it should have happened all along. It was such a natural transition to work with the team and just to be involved, because every show he's got on his network, Dame, he's very much about educating and professionalizing and showing people how to be successful entrepreneurs, showing people how to do it outside the system, showing people how they can, what their career path can really be, to your point, beyond what they originally imagined. So it's like the perfect place to slot my show in,
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm over here taking notes feverishly. I'm like,
I'm trying to be you, trust me.
I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I'm going to be 40 in November. Like, shit. I need to be just like,
I said mid-40s.
I know. But I got to get my plan together.
You have your plan together. Trust me. You definitely, and you have this amazing blend, and I don't have this at all. And I always have to be really careful with it. You have this incredible blend of, you're extremely opinionated and you do not hesitate to express your opinions, but somehow they don't come across as offensive, no matter how radical or like in one particular corner they are. You still manage to get everyone to gravitate over to you, even if they don't agree with you still. So I don't know if that's called charisma or if that's called, I'm not sure what that's called, but it's a very rare gift. And that is what gets you where you are.
Thank you. I never really thought about that. But yeah, people always say, like, I don't know why, like, Lauren will make fun of me and I'll just want to get closer to her. Like, I'm like, I don't know. I just don't have a filter. I don't know what it is. All right. I'm gonna recognize that gift in myself. Thank you.
You should.
So something else that I want to talk about before we wrap up is another thing that I have really admired about you is we talk about me being so vocal. I feel like you've been so vocal on behalf of people that don't look like you. It's always been a little joke, between me and Frank. He's like, Chelsea's blacker than I am. And
I didn't say that.
You did. I know. Frank said it. She didn't say it, for the record, but it was very impressive. And, me recently with like everything that's been happening in this, movement, that's kind of had a resurgence because 2020, what the hell? I've been really called to say something, but you've always had a voice. Where does that come from? And what have you seen, coming up the ranks in terms of sexism, racism, everything?
So for one thing, I'm going to thank my parents, and I'll give you some personal anecdotes, but I am going to thank my parents. So my parents were just crazy hippies. They went to Berkeley. My dad was an engineering student. My mom was studying, I don't know what, history or something. And, she was like dancing on tables or something when he plucked her out of a crowd, and they met and hung out at Haight-Ashbury in the 60s. And she was putting flowers in rifles and stuff. And so they have this amazing, beautifully super liberal mindset. And they, early on, I'm a kid of the 70s. They sent me to my elementary school was a magnet school, which had been, the magnet program was developed in response to busing, which was never going to work properly, right? So the magnets came about which were government funded, and which was sort of like the right way to do it. And they sent me to a magnet that very specifically, the theme, because as you know, all magnets have themes, the theme was integration. So this was in late 1970s, early 1980s, late 1970s. So the theme was integration. So that we had courses in that at the school, and the school was incredibly diverse. And from there, they sent me to all magnets, junior high and high school. So I continued to be at incredibly diverse schools at the very specific direction of my parents for my entire upbringing. So I think that had a huge part to play, because I grew up normally surrounded by lots and lots of different kinds of people with lots and lots of different POVs. So I attribute a lot of it to my parents. I actually didn't even realize that there were these sorts of issues necessarily, or that there was any kind of a glass ceiling, for example, for women, until, I kind of got into my corporate career, and then it's impossible not to see the stark difference. Like, for example, men, it's perfectly fine for them to say that they're going on a golf retreat, because everyone knows that men do business on the golf course. I do play golf, by the way. I suck, but I did learn how to play golf so I could get on the golf course with them, and they don't let women on the golf course with them. So that doesn't work. So women, don't waste your time. If you want to play golf, great, but don't do it because you think you're getting on the course with a bunch of men. That not happening. But that's where a lot of business happens. Whereas when women in the same corporate setting say, oh, cool, you guys did a golf retreat and you invited a lot of clients and you guys got a lot of work done and the firm funded that, we're going to have a spa retreat for women. And we're going to invite a bunch of the female clients, or we're going to have kind of a female-oriented sort of retreat. Now, all of a sudden, it's, oh, the ladies get to go off and be pretty for a day. They get spa day. And like, there's no way that we did any business that day, right? It can't at all be the same thing as what happened on the golf course. There's men can feel free to say, all right, I'm popping out of the office for a second because I've got a doctor's appointment, or I'm popping out because I'm going to go watch my kid play his, Little League game. And everyone's like, oh, what a great dad. He's going to go watch his kid play Little League. God forbid a woman says she's leaving early to go to a doctor's appointment. And I have an anecdote about that, by the way, specifically, or to go see her kid play Little League. Oh, no. I've never done that. I'm always going to meet a client off-site. I'm always going to some meeting. I'm never going to a doctor's appointment. I am never going to see my kid play a game. I always tell people I'm meeting a client off-site. And that's just a rule you have to get used to early on. When you leave the office as a woman, it better be for something professional. So I will say one thing. So I'll give you a couple of anecdotes of things that have happened to me along the way. So when I was a baby lawyer, the head of my practice came into my office and he plunked down a merger agreement. And he said, oh, I've got these edits or whatever. And when can you turn this around? I said, no problem. I'll turn around exactly when you need me to, 3 p.m. this afternoon, whatever. I said, look, if you pop into my office in the next couple of hours, you don't see me here, don't worry. I have a doctor's appointment. This is before I learned the rule. But the document will be on your chair at 3 p.m. exactly as you've asked. So don't worry about it. I just won't be here for a couple hours. This is before cell phones. He literally says to me, oh, female plumbing problems? So you hear about microaggressions, like that is a sexist microaggression. You hear mostly about racial microaggressions, like, can I touch your hair? Or like, oh, like you're not black like that. Or I've heard a bunch of them from people over the years. That's a microaggression towards women. Of female plumbing problems, he's implying I'm going to the OBGYN, right? Yeah. Or that same partner used to come around later on after I had my first baby, and I would pump in the office because, I was back from maternity leave, but I was still breastfeeding her. And I would pump in the office. Everybody else knew that when Chelsea has her door closed 3 times a day for 10 minutes a piece, she's pumping. Please don't disturb her. She is producing food from her body for her baby that her baby needs to eat later on. Like, it's a miracle it's happening in her office. Leave her the fuck alone. Right. This guy would come around and knock on the door every time, inevitably. Can you chat? Oh, Andy, I'm a little busy. Can we chat later? No, I'll just talk to you through the door. So do you think that's easy to create milk from your body when that's happening? No, you dry right up. Right. So like just microaggressions. I had a chairman of one of my boards call me kiddo the whole time that I was on the board. As per mentioned before, I'm 48 years old. I'm nobody's kiddo. But he called me kiddo the whole time and thought it was really cute. Until somebody kind of mentioned to him, she's been the CEO of 2 companies. You might not want to call her kiddo. that kind of stuff happens, you know, in terms of the racial stuff. You wouldn't believe the conversations white people have, you know, when they don't think anybody else is listening. You know, I've been told there's too many Black people on the website. You need to add some white models in. Why do all these models have such large asses? My wife is always trying to have a flatter ass. You know, I'm like, dude, you live in Greenwich. Like, of course you guys all want flatter asses, but like our customers don't, you know, like, oh, I've had it. I've had every kind of conversation. I will say, even on a personal level, I still have really bizarre, again, like this is past microaggression. I would say this is either sexual racism or racial fetishism. I haven't figured out exactly what this is. I had a person reach out to me on LinkedIn just the other day. I'm going to read this out loud to you because otherwise you just wouldn't believe it.
Oh my gosh, I'm scared.
This is a professional. So this isn't Instagram or Facebook. This isn't social media. It's business-oriented social media where you're supposed to be professional. It's business-oriented. We're supposed to be making money together on this platform. That is what you're doing on LinkedIn. She reached out to me about a friend of hers. She says she happens to know Frank, or she has met Frank at various functions. So she's like a professional colleague, you know, call it that. So she's met Frank. It's the only way I can even figure out how she bothered to send me this sort of message. She says, I've been wanting to introduce you to my friend X. Think you'll enjoy her. She's a fitness devotee, smart, beautiful, whatever. She told me she wants to meet a great guy who is smart, handsome, and Black. I thought you'd have a better read on who is available and interested. And it goes from there. And I'm like, bitch, what do I know? All the Black men. And I'm like the central repository for introducing your white friend to some Black guy. A. B, if one of the things on her list is the guy needs to be Black, that is racial fetishism. And that's just gross. You need to bury that shit. Bury that shit. I'm gonna like, don't say that out loud to anybody ever again. And also, I'm curious to hear how you feel about this. Like, it feels to me like, as a white woman, if I'm setting a bunch of Black guys up with a white woman, it's like colonialism at its worst, right? Like, that is not my place to be doing that.
Right.
Everything's wrong with that.
That is shocking. That is shocking.
Like, it's subtle, and it's such a subtle little thing that happens in life. And I'm sure other people have encountered subtleties like that. It's like shows you how finely ingrained in the fabric of this society just racial shit exists, you know? It's such a subtle little.
I know, it's unbelievable. And I've been getting myself quite upset and worked up because, like you say, like, you'd be surprised at what white people say when they don't think Black people are listening. I feel like people still behave that way on social media. So I'll find an article and I'm like, I can't help it. I'll like gravitate towards the comments and I'm like, I can't believe people are saying this. Like, literally, like, lately I've been fascinated. I love Meghan Markle. I think she's beautiful. I think she's incredible. No matter what article is written about her, no matter what it's about, all of the comments are slamming her.
I know.
And it's just because she's Black.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, it's amazing how insidious and prevalent all of this is. And it's like, whatever. So I love that you've always stood up for us, and through the work you've done in American Apparel for all different groups and sizes. It's so important that even if a little bit of it can get more exposure or get normalized, I think it makes a huge difference. And, there's all sorts of memes, and I get where they're coming from that are like, okay, cool. Like, you took Aunt Jemima off the syrup bottle, but what about the police? And what about the
killers? Yeah,
for sure. But I do think those little things that we do, that we're not making all the gangbangers in a video game Black people, because that's going to seep into a young person's mind. And it's just going to perpetuate all of this racism. And for you to have people with booties and people with color on these ads, it's just that little hint that will tell someone, like, I'm okay to exist, because we live in such a world where whether a person has experienced it or not, it doesn't mean that it's not real. Like, I've experienced it. You've seen it, secondhand, like through your LinkedIn. It's here.
Yeah, I mean, I've been out with my son. My son fences competitively. My son's black and he fences competitively, which is like rare you don't see a lot of African Americans in that sport, but whatever. And we find ourselves in the weirdest of places in middle America because they always put these big tournaments in the like convention centers that are cheap to rent out, which is always in like Milwaukee or some, some crazy place you never thought you'd find yourself. And like somebody walked up to us at one of these tournaments and asked him for his autograph, thought he was Stefan Curry, the basketball player. And I was like, because he's light skinned and he's got super curly hair. Like what? Like he doesn't look anything like Stefan Curry. You guys can all look him up. He's on my Instagram. Yeah. I'm like that kind of stuff. Like the subtle, everyday kind of nuanced, just sort of like, oh, my kid had to experience that. That just blows,
Yeah.
But also like even going back to this woman on LinkedIn, and I do intend to have a conversation with her when I'm not so enraged. And right now I am in like the Hulk smash mindset. So once I get that, then I'll have a convo with her. But even her, like, let's say I was actually this dingbat white girl and I was like, all right, I will set your white friend up with some black guy or a bunch of the black guys that I know. Like, I feel bad for those guys. Like, guys that they're being fetishized like that and that she's really just using them for God knows what, and then like, that's it. It's like, it just, there's so many layers to it. I don't know. But you're right. I mean, it just perpetuates, it just eats on itself. It's, you're right. There's not one thing that's going to fix it. It's inch by inch, mile by mile. And it does go back to it goes back to the original thing we were talking about actually, which is you talk to people in terms of things that resonate with them, which always goes back to the dollar. So here it really is true. When the water rises, all boats float. And what people it's going to take them to understand this movement and why it should be important for everybody is once you're not oppressing people, once everyone is allowed to reach their full potential, once everyone is allowed to equally contribute and draw from the economy, that's when all the boats are going to float. That's when we're all going to be rich and prosperous. That's when this country is really going to be what it needs to be, just specifically speaking about here. And when people finally understand it like that, with that data point, then it'll be great. And then you're sort of like, well, is that really the right way? Shouldn't it be from a moral perspective? I don't really care. As long as we just like stop killing people and allow people to be in the room, to use your term, that's all that really matters in the long run,
Right? I know. Just get in, do what you got to do to make it happen.
And oh, by the way, and this could be a whole other thing, but it's like, Frank and I have these, fantastical conversations all the time, and he's like, we should just take a swath in the middle of America. That should be Wakanda, it should be Black America and the rest of it. And, at first I was like, babe, like that doesn't work. I mean, like what would govern the whole thing? And like, how do you pass through? Do you need a passport? Like whatever. And I suddenly realized, okay, I'm going to get out of that fixed mindset and get into his growth mindset, which is, we've seen that already in the EU. The EU already has a federation or whatever you want to call it. You don't need passports. If you're a citizen of one of the European Union countries, you can pass through to the others. They have a set of rules, but they have very specific states within that, within that union. And in fact, it might be the place that Israel is heading towards with the Palestinians. A bi-nation state or a federation, whatever you want to call it. So it's not like the model doesn't exist elsewhere.
Right.
So anyways, there's all sorts of really interesting fixes you can talk about, but whatever we're doing right now, it ain't working. So we clearly need to change it.
Obviously. And that's where, I thought about this get in the room thing, because I feel like, especially for powerful, like type A women, we're very go, go, go. And we don't sit back and realize like, whoa, how did I get here? And I'm actually in a place where I can do something, which is why I wanted to speak to you. Like you have found yourself in multiple positions of power. You've actually done something with it, and for me personally to like defy the odds, like I didn't go to business school. I didn't have like a silver spoon put in my mouth. I figured it out. I grew 2 businesses. I have $1 million business. I'm in this organization. It's like, that's power. It's not nearly the power that I plan on achieving, but it's really important. I mean, even to have a book on a shelf, that's important. So it's like, what am I going to do with this power? And you have to recognize that you have that power first. And for everyone else who's sitting back and is listening in awe of like, Chelsea is the bomb. Like, how do I do this? It's just the first step of like get in, like even identifying that dream and the getting in and being so in tune with yourself and your potential that you really can do anything and you can change the whole entire game. Like there are things that haven't been done that can be done that only we can do. Because everybody else is like, the people that are already running the room, they're perfectly comfortable and happy with how things are going. So good luck putting the onus on them. They're not changing it.
It's working for them. And if you ask them to, even if you say to them, oh, can you diversify this boardroom? The 5 white guys in that room are going to call their wives and be like, hey, babe, do you know anybody? And then she's going to refer them to the person who wears Lily Pulitzer in her life. And that person's going to join the room. And that hasn't really diversified the boardroom at all. You know, they are perfectly comfortable working within their network to have the optics of diversity or to have the optics of we let somebody in that was different from us. Right. So to your point, it's about being bold. It's about taking bold steps and putting your fear aside and knowing that you deserve to be there, that you have the ability to be there and just barging in, again, in a way that doesn't threaten them because they'll kick you right out. But
right.
It's a fine balance.
So good. Thank you so much for chatting with us. This was an incredible conversation. I learned a lot. Like, I'm going to go back and listen and be like, okay, what's my next move? So thank you so much. And everybody watching, if you haven't yet joined the Get in the Room challenge, please join. It's completely free to join. And we're going to be having these conversations and I'm going to be taking you through a system to get in the room. So you're going to be put to work. You're going to be doing some stuff so you can tap into this power that Chelsea has and has turned into this massive success. Like it's even beyond like an empire. It's just this like entity. So please join. It's free. lauramessiah.com/room. Thank you for tuning in. And we have more interviews coming up this week. So stay plugged into my Instagram because I will be announcing them there. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.